I'm going to try to keep this video fairly short, but I'm going to use this time to talk about some of the things I was going to talk about in class last week regarding the assessment assignment. First, I want to apologize one more time for canceling class at the last minute. I hope that wasn't an inconvenience. I know it's nice to have a night off, but I also know that canceling at the last minute can cause issues, so I do apologize for that. You should have received an email regarding this week's class. Let me know if you have any questions about what you need to do to prepare. But just like I said in the email, this is informal. As long as you show me that you're trying, it's going to be a completion grade. So there's nothing that's going to be assessed as far as how you teach. It's only going to be that you did teach, and you'll get full credit for that. So the assessment assignment information can be found in a few places. We have already started this a little bit in some online classes near the beginning of the semester, and whether or not you did it, because I never actually collected it. I told you a couple of times to bring it to class, but we never went over it. So you might have already started, or you might not have if you didn't do it. You can find information in this lesson plan and assessment assignment folder. And you can also find the information if you go to assignments and click on the assignment. But I'm going to direct you to this very last folder called November 7th, because that is what I was going to share with you when we were in class last week before I canceled it. In this folder, you'll see there is the assignment guidelines, which we're going to talk about in this video. And then there are also several examples from previous students, which I thought might be helpful for you to see. I chose two that are from students taking 330, so those are undergraduate or FLIR students. And I chose two examples from students taking 530, and those are our MAT students. There's a slight difference in the assignment for 330 versus 530, and I wanted you to see some students who had to do that slight difference if you're an MAT student. But all of the examples are helpful to everyone, because you'll see when we look at the assignment, there's just a slight difference. So you can still look at all four examples and just ignore the different part. If you're 330, ignore the 530 part. Or if you're 530, just know you would also have to do that part. But all examples will help you. They weren't my students. They were from a previous professor who taught the course, but all of them scored very well based on her grades. So I think that there will be good examples for you to see and to use when you're thinking about yours. And I'll click on a few of them to talk about them. I also put some resources in here, some website resources that might help you when you're thinking about your assessment and the objective. We've talked about this in class a lot, especially at the beginning of the semester when we looked at standards. And we talked about it with mastery objectives, choosing objectives that are measurable. And we said that to be measurable, we have to be able to, by the end of the lesson, measure or determine whether or not the student can do whatever the objective is asking. So if my objective says compare, if that's the verb, compare, then my assessment should have them compare. And I'm measuring their ability to compare. And so then my assessment is aligned with my objective. If my objective says to identify, that's my verb, then in the assessment, that's what they should be doing. They should be identifying. So that's the key, is what's my verb in my objective, and that's the verb I should use in my assessment. So if we click on the assessment assignment, we can briefly go through it. And I'll pull it up for you. I did make some slight adjustments to it at the beginning of the semester. When it was in that folder, it still had some due dates from last spring and I got rid of those. But you'll see where it says using the assessment worksheet that we started. Well, that was something that you would have started in one of our online classes, and we never actually got to during class. So if you've started that and you want to use that, that's great. If you want to start over and do it a little bit differently, that's fine too. However you get to this point where this assignment is that I just pulled up is up to you. You're not going to turn in that assessment worksheet that was part of a previous online course. You're only going to turn in this document right here. So you're actually going to type inside of this document. So all you have to worry about is opening it from here and then doing File, Save As, and save it something, it could just be assessment assignment and your last name. Save it somewhere in your computer and then typing directly in this assignment. So this is what you're going to turn in to me. So there are essentially 3 components of this assignment, and we're going to discuss each of them as quickly as I can, and then you can ask me more questions in class on Wednesday night before it's due next Sunday. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to list the standard that you're going to address, and you notice it says include the notation. That's the beginning part where it might say RL period 5, period 1, so it might be reading literature, 5th grade, first standard. So we've looked at that. So that's at the beginning of it. And then notice it also says you can strike through any of the parts that you're not going to use. So we've also talked about sometimes with an objective or standard, you can't get to the whole what it's asking, all of it, in one lesson or in 2 lessons, which is what you have for this. So you can strike through and say that this is the part that I'm focusing on, and then we'll just know that the other parts you'll address in a different lesson. So you put that here. So right there, you're just really listing it, nothing more. In number 2, you're going to talk about the summative assessment that you plan to use. So when you did the lesson plan worksheet and you had those columns where you talked about lesson 1 and lesson 2 and then your summative assessment, you can copy that directly from there. So I failed to say at the beginning of this video, this assignment is related to the 2 lessons that you wrote for me. So you wrote 2 lessons that were back to back. They had formative assessments. They had a summative assessment, or they should have at some point, even if it didn't occur in the lesson. This is where you're going to tease that out and tell me more about it. Now, in the lessons you wrote for me, if you feel like your summative assessment and your formative assessment need to be edited a bit and made a little bit better, this is your chance. So it doesn't have to be exactly what your lesson plan said. Because again, we're not teaching this. This is all hypothetical. So this is your chance to make it what you want it to be. But it should be tied with your lesson. So up here, you're just copying and pasting whatever objectives you used in your lessons. So here you're going to describe the summative assessment, and notice it says you're going to create it. So if you have a quiz, you'll create the quiz. If you have an exit ticket, which probably wouldn't be summative, you'll create that. If you have some kind of project or writing prompt, you'll create that. And you'll put it at the end of the document. Okay? In the third one, you're going to sorry, I was reading number 4. Yeah, we'll go ahead and talk about number 3. So in the third one, you're going to tell me how are you going to evaluate the students on their summative assessment. For example, is there going to be a rubric, and that's how you evaluate them and you can tell how they've done? Or is there going to be a checklist? So maybe you just want to make sure they address certain things in what they're writing, and as long as they address those, you check them off and they get credit? Is it going to be just notes that you take? So how are you going to evaluate them? For example, when I have assignments for you, if we go into assignments, your observation reflection is one. I have a rubric for that. So the majority of our assignments, I have a rubric. This is my evaluation criteria. So number 3 says, describe the evaluation criteria for your summative assessment. For your observation rubric, this is my evaluation criteria. This is how I'm going to evaluate what you did. So if your observation reflection was a summative assessment for me, this would be how I'm evaluating it. So notice that it's closely related to the standard. So you're evaluating them on whether or not they know and can do what the standard says. So if the standard says to compare, then in your evaluation criteria somewhere it should say something about them being able to compare. Whether it's a checklist, whether it's a rubric, it should address that. So notice it says create a rubric, create a checklist, create the explanation of how you're going to evaluate them. Whatever you're going to do, it should show that. So if you create a rubric, it should be in kid-friendly language because it's something your students are going to see. Your rubrics, you're adults, and I can write them in that way. But I might create a different rubric for a kindergartner. Maybe I have smiley faces. And if the student did it well, it's a smiley face. If there are some issues, maybe it's a straight face. So I can create the rubric in different ways to target that age of learner. Another one was a checklist. So, for example, the sample teaching and video submission. This is something that you're just going to do. You're going to teach your lesson on Wednesday. Then you're going to send me the video. Not through EDU 2.0. I'm going to tell you a different way. But as long as you do your video, that's 50% check. As long as you send me your video, that's 50% check. That's my checklist essentially. If I were to, I can make up a paper that has a checklist and I check off that you did each of those, and then you would get credit for it, and that would be your 100. Okay? So that's how I'm evaluating you. That's my evaluation criteria for that assignment. So you're going to create your evaluation criteria and you're going to put it at the end of this document. Then you're going to think about the formative assessments. So you have 2 lessons, 2 consecutive lessons, and you need to have at least 1 formative assessment in each one. Now remember, that could be an exit ticket, that could even be you walking around and listening to students. If you're walking around and listening to students, then I would have some kind of checklist, that you're thinking about that you can check off to show what you're listening for as you're walking around. You're not walking around planning your dinner. You're listening for certain things the students are saying to know that they are achieving that standard. So you're going to create your formative assessments and put them at the end of the document. So at the end of the document, you're going to have a summative assessment, your evaluation criteria, and 2 formative assessments. And in these sections, you're going to talk about what you have. Sorry if you hear banging, that's just my children. So you're going to talk about what you have in those sections. And you'll see that when you look at the examples. So you're going to type right in these spots. You don't need to create a new document. Now this last section is only for the 530 students, so those are our MAT students, and you know if that's you. In this section, you're going to write a little bit more about assessment and about what you did based on some of the readings that we did earlier in the semester. So it says in the September 12th folder, That's the, if you go to resources, you'll go to that folder. There were a couple articles that you read about assessment on it during either an online class or you did it for class. And I want you to write 2 to 4 paragraphs that will help you, that will show that you can make connections from those articles and what you did to design your assessments. So I already went ahead, the previous professor did this, so I'm not going to take credit, and put the citations here for you. So they're already right, so you can just copy and paste and put those at the end of anything you cite. If you use a quote, then you're going to right here put the page number. If it's not a quote, then you only need this if you're just paraphrasing. Okay, so again, with the Wolf and Stevens, 2007, page whatever, if it's a quote. If it's not a quote, you don't need a page. So let's look at some examples. If we go back to that go to resources and go back to the September 7th assessment folder, you see there are 4 examples, and these were previous students, not in my class, but who took this course in the spring, so most recent course, and did well on this assignment. So you see this first question is very simple. All you do is copy and paste, and notice that the student said they'll determine the main idea of the text and explain how it's supported and cross through the summarize. So all she wants or he wants the student to do is just determine and explain. Determine the main idea, explain it with key details, and not get to summarizing yet. The student talks about the summative assessment, so you see an example there. The student talks about the evaluation criteria. The student talks about the formative assessments, the first one and the second one, and then the student puts them in here. So you see there's the first formative assessment, there's the second formative assessment, there's the evaluation criteria, and it is a checklist. So there's an example of a checklist. So the topic is the subject of the paragraph. Check, the student did it. That's what a checklist would look like. And then there's the summative assessment that she created. Okay. If we look at a 530 example, it's all the same components except for that last question. So again, this person did the strike through, has certain things the students are doing and certain that they're not. And she describes the summative assessment, which you can read on your own, has the evaluation criteria, which is a rubric that the student created, and a checklist. Talks about the formative assessments, and then this is an example of that 5th question where she made connections between the articles that she read and what she did for her assessments. Okay. You can go through the other examples. I would read them, I would look at them and think about it. There is a secondary, I think this one is a secondary example. I try to pull the ones who did the best, yes, 11th grade, who got the best scores from the previous professor. And I think I have 3 elementary and one secondary. But you can read through that. This is going to be due Sunday, so you have all of this week and the weekend to take what you did in your 2 lessons, put the standard here, talk about your summative assessment, talk about how you're going to evaluate the students, which is something you might not have created yet, which is fine. If you didn't create a rubric for your 2 lessons, that's fine. I didn't tell you had to do that. This is your chance to do it, if that's what works for you. Notice that first example I pulled up, she didn't have a rubric, she had a checklist, and that was fine too. put your 2 formative assessments here. So if you have a exit ticket, then make it. This is the chance to actually make it and put it in there and talk about it. And then if you're an MAT student, you're going to connect what you did to literature, and those would be those articles that you read in the September 12th folder. Okay, I've already talked a lot, and I said I would keep it short, and of course I didn't. So I'm going to stop the video at this point. And what I want you to do is let me know what questions you have. You can email me, or we can also devote a little bit of time for questions on Wednesday about this assignment that's due Sunday night.